Okay, picking up where we left off on page 414, we're talking about the difference between a fat client and a thin client. So, a fat client, perhaps the client is sharing an opportunity, like downloading bits and pieces of the data, and therefore there's going to be an awful lot of network traffic going back and forth because I have a chunk of the data that I have to play with. And so if I modify it, has to send it back and forth. Whereas a thin client, it doesn't get downloaded any data, and therefore there's very little network traffic that has to go through. And because the thin client doesn't have networking, it itself is pretty efficient. Now, admittedly, it puts a pretty good load on the server part, so that might not be the case in the long run. So, thin client is dirt cheap because you don't have to worry about disk space because it doesn't even have a disk. It's a diskless workstation. Ease of development, well, okay, now you got to do a little bit more. And I'll add one more characteristic onto this table, and that's security. If I have a diskless workstation, there's not a very likely scenario where somebody can come in and steal my computer and get anything useful from it. They'll take the diskless workstation home, they'll plug it in, and it'll come up and say, gee, I can't find my boot server. And that'll be as far as they go. There's no information on there. Okay. So, coming up next, they talk about the in-tier architecture. And so they talk about the two-tier model. And the two-tier model is basically where you have the application and the user interface, and it talks to the server, and the server can do all the business logic and all the data. So that's two-tier, and that works pretty doggone well. And then the third tier, they just separate the business logic piece from the database piece. So it's and I'm going to give you the proper terms for this, not necessarily what's in the book, but the proper terms is the user service layer, USL. Sometimes they just call that the GUI, but the user service layer, business logic layer, and data access layer. So USL, BLL, and DAL. Those are the three layers in a three-tier architecture. Now, I'll admit, I'm just like you guys, right? I went to school, I learned this stuff, and I kind of nodded my head and went, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever, whatever, dude. Yeah, three-tier, okay, whatever. And then one day, I'm working on an application, and they said, great, I need you to put this on the web. And I went, oh, well, okay, I'll just take my application and I'll just strip the user interface off and make the user interface web-based. And then I realized I had not done an in-tier architecture, that inside my user interface was all sorts of calculations and logic and all sorts of things that didn't belong there. And I'd been programming that way for years. And I heard the words, in-tier architecture. But it wasn't until I was provided an opportunity to convert one of my Windows-based applications to web-based that I realized, oh my God, those guys were right. I should have separated the user interface from the rest of this application. And from that point on, every time I wrote an application, no matter what it was, I made sure it was in-tier. I made sure that the user interface was separate. So I have this application now that it runs as a Windows application. It runs as an Android app. It runs as a web app. It runs on a Mac and on Linux, and 5 or 6 different versions of the same application. And the second and third layers are all the same. Yeah. That they're all actually the same, and the only thing I had to make a change to was the user interface, that top layer, the USL. So, if you're a programmer, take this to heart. If you're not a programmer, you can say, I'll just remember this for the test, and then I'll be good. Okay, let's continue. On page 416, they talk about middleware. Middleware is basically how systems can two disparate systems can talk to each other. Now, I will tell you that the middleware industry used to be huge, because I had an IBM mainframe over there, and I have this PC application over here, and there was just no way to have those two talk to each other and pass data back without some sort of middleware software. However, those kind of days are going away. If I was a middleware vendor, I'd be a little scared, because practically no one uses middleware anymore. Because everything is web-based, and everyone has basically adopted XML as the way to transmit data from one source to another. So as long as if your mainframe can talk and listen to XML, and my machine can talk and listen to XML, then I don't need middleware. So middleware is still around, but in a different form. It's not a piece of software you go out and purchase. It's more a set of standards that you use for interoperability. Okay. They talk about some issues with cost benefit, and so let me just kind of go through this. To support business requirements, information systems need to be scalable, powerful, and flexible. Now, that sounded kind of generic, didn't it? But think about the scenario of a mainframe computer, and you wanted to expand it, that you were overtaxing the machine and you needed it to upgrade. You'd say, do I really want to go and buy another mainframe and bolt them together and spread the load, or is this the time I want to just stop and say, hold on, let's start up with a whole new architecture? So yes, cost benefit is a very powerful piece of this system design piece. Performance issues, and of course, once again, kind of using the mainframe as a focal point. The performance kind of it kind of goes and goes, and then it reaches some magic point, and then boom, just drops off, because you got too many users, and then all of a sudden the performance of the system just craters, because you've reached some magic point where from that point on it's handling too many. So again, if you want to keep the response times down in a system design, you might want to consider, okay, now's the time to get away from the mainframe. Okay, so on page 417 they talk about the impacts of the internet. Well, of course, the internet has influenced almost everything with regard to business. And there's some particular terms, cloud computing. I'm sure you've heard that a gazillion times. But, so, you guys know what the internet is, So in addition to having this, data and application logic, the entire user interface occurs in the browser. The entire USL occurs in the browser. That way, I can be on an Android tablet, I can be on my iPad, I can be on my phone, I can be on my PC or on my Mac, and as long as I have a browser, I can still run your application. Pretty doggone cool. And of course, that means we're really kind of shifting the responsibility to the client for an awful lot of things. Things that you used to do in Tier 2, okay, the browser now has to do. And so the browser companies have kind of stepped up to the plate and said, we're going to make this thing happen for you. What do you need? And they're developing all these cool frameworks that you can add on to make your browser smarter and make the user interface a little bit better, and all these kinds of things. Okay, so on page 418 we talk about cloud computing. And cloud computing is really just kind of a marketing term. All it really means, of course, is that I'm doing business or providing some sort of a service over the internet. That's it. That's all there is. It's not a very exciting thing. But one of the definitions, the concepts, is that remote computers that provide total online software and data environment that's typically hosted by a third party. There is such a thing as called private cloud, where it's the same set of technologies. It's just that you're not hiring a company to do it for you. You're doing it on your own machines. To tell you the truth, that's pretty rare, because one of the whole points of cloud computing is it's somebody else's business to maintain it, do the patches on the software, all the rest of those things. So I'm hiring out cloud services. I don't want to know about backups. I don't want to know about virus checks. I don't want to know about patches to the operating system. That's what I'm paying you for. I don't want to deal with it. So the whole concept of private cloud is sort of like, well, I like cloud computing, but I don't want anybody else to do it. I want me to do it. It's like, what? Okay. So it does require a significant amount of bandwidth in order for this to work. So companies can do cloud computing fairly well. If you're a company with a local area network and you're connected to maybe a 10 megabit up and down commercial network going to the internet, then you're probably set to use cloud computing. You could probably do hosted Exchange or perhaps Office 365 on the cloud without too much trouble. It won't be an issue for you. Now at home, I'm on a phone with 3G service. Maybe that might be a little on the slow side, and maybe the cloud computing isn't going to be quite as viable an option there. Okay. Continuing on page 419 to talk about Web 2.0. And again, Web 2.0 is really a marketing term. It's not really a real thing. And I've described this to you before, but I'll give it to you one more time. And that is basically Web 2.0 means is it provides you an opportunity to participate. Up to I guess Web 1.0. Everything was static, and the web author determined 100% of the content you saw. And there was no opportunity for you to upload anything or make any comments or do anything at all whatsoever to that web page. And now we have, Flickr and Facebook and Wikipedia and all these things where I can participate. I can submit photos. I can scribble on your wall. I can put blog comments. I, the user, can add content to your web page. That's the essence of 2.0. So, and of course the applications that do that are all server-based, right? And have embraced those technologies we've talked about, where the companies come in and say, we know that the web server really doesn't do all that, but here's a little package that can do it. Here's a forum package. Here's a blog package. Here's an upload package. And you just buy these packages, and then presto changeo, you can now do Facebook style updates inside your web page. Okay. And of course the idea of Web 2.0 is to make it more engaging and to have more creativity and ownership and basically to get people to come back to your web page. If I'm selling used cars, you'd be kind of hard pressed to generate an awful lot of interest. But if you had some sort of content where they could update, you might get a following, so to speak. People coming back to your web page on a periodic basis. At the bottom of page 419, they talk about the architecture associated with e-commerce, and they talk about the in-house solution. So let's say that I'm going to put together something, and it's not gonna be hosted. I'm going to do it myself. So let's talk about what all that means. First of all, it will provide you an opportunity to have a very, very unique web page. Most likely, if you went to somebody else to build a web page, it's going to look an awful lot like somebody else's. It's going to look store-bought. So if you want a unique website, perhaps with your corporate identity thrown in it a lot, then you may have to end up doing it yourself. Now, doing it yourself doesn't mean you have to hire people to do it. You can still hire employees to do this. You could hire bits and pieces of it out. I'm talking about hosting. You're not going out to a third party saying, build me something. So you have complete control of the organization of the site. You can determine how scalable it is, because you kind of know what to do. You know how many you're going to have, and you're not going to be competing against anyone else's traffic. Okay. It's more flexible because, again, you're in control, and you have an opportunity to integrate the firm's back end, all the rest of the things, all the rest of the systems that already exist. So this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark, and we'll catch you again in just a few.